Welcome back to Football Weather. Galen Clavio, Matt Blaska joining you back in person. Yeah. This is nice. As it's a Sunday, we thought, well, gosh, let's keep talking football as we're close, Matt. The Farmageddon, the Ireland version, not too far away.
It's 12 days, right? Or 13 days till Farmageddon. I'm sure those folks are excited to go over. As we were going through some of the stuff, the Big 12 today, I just forgot. I couldn't believe that they were the teams picked to go over to Ireland, but that's a different story. It's great that we're finally getting some football.
Yeah, exactly. And before we get any further, I'm going to have you move your mic a little closer. There we go. Yeah. We're working out the tech on all of this stuff, but yeah, I often think about these international games as a way to spread the gospel of American sport. Kansas State, Iowa State is an interesting thing to be putting in front of an audience in an overseas market. But then again, they've set Northwestern at least once, and I don't know if that makes it's a completely different sector of America. Let's put it that way. It's Northwestern and Iowa State really kind of represent the two polar opposites of the experience one can get in Division I football.
Yeah, you're right. Northwestern football, not really known for their football prowess, but certainly known for being a great private school in the United States. So certainly bring over those donors that really want to watch their Northwestern Wildcats play football.
Yeah, so it's great. I'm glad. I'm looking for. I think everyone's looking forward to that. That's a noon Eastern kick on ESPN on Saturday the 23rd. There's some other games that day as well. None of them really rise to that level, but we've got Fresno State at Kansas on Fox, Sam Houston, Western Kentucky, and then Stanford, Hawaii is the evening game. It's a nice mix.
It is a nice mix. 5 games, and it's nice that they're adding more to week 0. I think that we'll see more of this as time goes on, as the calendar shifts, and some I'm sure we'll talk about down the road here, as they are now talking more about the calendar and the football calendar, whether it's going to be 2 transfer portals or 1 transfer portal. But anyway, it's good that there's going to be football played in 2 weeks. I think people are ready. I've even seen some of the beat writers like, let's just play. We're getting to the point where people are getting bored of just talking about anything.
Well, there's just only so much that you can talk about, and we don't have a poll yet to talk about
tomorrow.
It's the AP poll, comes out tomorrow. So by the time this gets released, or by the time you listen to it, it may have already dropped. We do not have access to it yet. So right now we're just kind of waiting to see what that's going to look like. Will it look similar to the coaches poll? Hard to say. This will be maybe a slightly shorter episode than the last couple. If you've not been keeping track, you should subscribe to Football Weather on Spotify. You can watch us on the Back Home Network YouTube channel. But one of the things that we've tried to do as we get ready in the ramp up to this season is focus on the teams that we feel have the best chance of making the college football playoff, the 2025 version, by looking at schedules, by trying to gauge relative strength of teams. We did that for the SEC. We did it for the Big Ten. So now it's everybody else's turn. And when you talk about everybody else, obviously you've got the 2 not really power conferences, but they still call themselves power conferences in the Big 12 and the ACC. And then you've got Notre Dame, and then you've got everybody else. And so we wanted to go through, look at schedules, figure out what we thought we were going to see with everything, compare notes, because we haven't really talked about this except in a couple isolated instances. And then we'll have a better sense, I think, at that point of where everything's going. So where would you like to start?
Let's start Notre Dame, since they're kind of on their own little island. Let's go there. We could look at their schedule, or I guess their main games, if you will. Notre Dame, they play the UConn are the only 2 independents left, but they open the season at Miami, which will be a tough game. Mm-hmm. They play Texas A&M, USC. They play Syracuse. Those are probably their really tough games. That they'll play this year. They'll also play at Arkansas. They do have Boise State, who is one of the Group of 5 favorites. Coming off a national championship appearance, you would think that Miami game right out of the gate is going to tell us a lot about this team. Certainly playing A&M pretty close after that, and they play USC in mid-October. So Notre Dame's interesting, right? We've seen them over the course of the last couple of years put up this stinker of a game. Last year was Northern Iowa. They lost. They were played one of the worst football
Northern
games.
Illinois.
Northern Illinois, sorry. Northern Illinois, where they lost. I can't remember the final score, but they were outplayed all day. They lost that game, and they had to win out for them to go to the playoff. This year, they have a couple more opportunities, I would say, to probably have their floor be 10-2.
Okay.
With that said, the losses I have, the only loss I really see right now is the only loss I have. I think they'll win it at Miami. I think they're just going to be further along. I have them losing to A&M, as I said in a previous episode. And I don't know where the second loss is coming from. I just don't trust them to win all their games.
Right. This is where it's going to be interesting because, as you said, they've got a couple of early tests. I have them losing at Miami, but I have them beating Texas A&M and then winning the rest of their regular season games. That seems perhaps implausible, but one of the issues you run into is you go down that list. It's just not a very impressive schedule. It's Purdue, who's going to be bad, Arkansas, who's probably going to be a bottom 4 team in the SEC, we think, maybe bottom 5, depending on what happens with Vanderbilt. You've got Boise State, NC State, USC, but it's in South Bend, at Boston College, Navy, at Pitt, Syracuse, and at Stanford. I mean, there's not a lot of meat on the bone there. And I'm with you in that it'd be surprising if they ran the table after losing either of those first 2 games. But then you look at the schedule in the individual games, and it's hard. It's kind of like what happened last year with them. Because if you go back and you look at what Notre Dame's schedule was last year, which everybody seems to have forgotten about, they had a very similar looking schedule. Texas A&M on the road, which they won. They lose that game 16-14 to NIU. And then a bunch of pretty mid teams, with the exception of Army, who was clearly not on the same plane from a physical perspective, and a team that really benefited from playing a weak schedule, but doing very well against it. And so when I look across the board, I think Notre Dame has put themselves again in a good position to be in the playoff, because if they take care of business against the teams they should take care of business against, they probably won't have any problems, which brings up the larger issue of why do they get the benefits of scheduling like this, where they can point to all these power conference teams on their schedule, but they're not playing the requisite number of good games against the power conference, even the middle of a power conference. A lot of these teams I would not look at in the ACC, for instance. I think you could make an argument that as we go into this year, let me go back to the 25 schedule. They're not playing Georgia Tech this year. They're not playing Clemson. They're playing Miami, but they've largely dodged all of the other good teams in the ACC. That's some fortunate scheduling for them.
Yeah, and I think that scheduling agreement for them starts next year with Clemson, right, where they have to play Clemson or Miami every year. So that will certainly help in the future years. But right now, they definitely got the right side of the barn for the ACC schedule. One team to look out for, and that's just because Syracuse might be a very good team, but their road schedule this year, and they're not going to be in the mix, but I just want to point this out. They have a Tennessee game. It's in Atlanta. Then they have at Clemson, at SMU, at Georgia Tech, at Miami, at Notre Dame. That's the road schedule.
Man,
I mean, that might be the toughest road schedule in the country.
I feel like them and Wisconsin should get together and just have their own bowl game at the end of the year. It's like the Survivor Bowl.
Right.
That's pretty wild.
I mean, Cuse was 10 they were 9-3. They ended up finishing 10-3. So they could be a very good team. So maybe that's the spot where they have a hiccup at the end of the season. Because they really could be a good team. It might not show in the record for them this year, just based on that road schedule.
Let's dive into some of these ACC teams, since we're in the ACC adjacent portion of the program. Let's talk about Miami. So Miami misses out on the playoff last year. It was right there for them, and they couldn't make it happen. Lost to Syracuse at the tail end, and they suffered. They were essentially what would have happened if Indiana had lost one more regular season game. Very similar kind of circumstance. They're not in quite a bad a shape this year because they play Notre Dame in that first game, and they play Florida, but they also get them at Hard Rock Stadium. They play Louisville, but they get them at Hard Rock Stadium. That you could make an argument that they're only real tough, if depending on what you feel about Florida State. But you could make an argument their only real tests are the game at SMU, which will be probably a test, and the game at Virginia Tech, who feels like a fringe top 25 team at best. I think that this schedule sets up really well for Miami.
Yeah, I mean, there's one game in there that maybe Florida could be a tough one. Florida's really kind of that Jekyll and Hyde team that we're not sure what they're going to do this year. They finished strong, but again, they have a really tough schedule. And
they really do, to some degree, hold the key for a lot of team schedules, because a lot of playoff hopes are banking on, can we beat Florida? Right. Miami being one of those teams.
Right. Everybody really wants them to go 8-4, but they don't want to be one of those 8s. Yeah. So the one thing with Miami is, if you look at their schedule closely, they leave the state of Florida once through November 15th. So that sets up really nice for them, and they go to Dallas to play SMU, which is it's going to be a tough road game. SMU, a playoff team last year, obviously did not draw the same schedule this year, and we'll get to SMU here in a second. But I think Miami is going to be in the mix all year. There's no reason why they shouldn't. Even though I have them losing that Notre Dame game, I have them still going 7-1 in conference, with their only loss being the SMU. So I think they'll be right in the mix. I think they're going to be really good. The schedule sets up really nicely for them. Being at home for almost the entire schedule, I think is a huge win that no one else in the country is going to have like this.
Yeah, absolutely. And at the end of it all, I feel like if they go into playoff periods, where the selections being made, and they've got wins against Notre Dame and Florida and Louisville, and a loss to Stanford, to SMU. Not Stanford would be a different story, but a loss. But if that's their only loss and it's on the road, or even if they have 2 losses, I think they'd still be in the mix. It sets up much nicer for them.
I agree. Yeah, I mean, as long as they hold the rope here, and they finish probably 10-2. And those losses are in Stanford.
Right.
I think they're going to be in really good shape.
Don't lose to Stanford. Bad idea.
I think they're going to be in really good shape, and they can probably end up in Charlotte for the ACC championship.
Let's go to SMU. Now, SMU was in the playoff last year and had a really, one of those seasons, much like Indiana, where you're like, wow, I can't believe it finally culminated. Indiana had never been good, except for 2 seasons in its entire history, essentially. And SMU, of course, got the death penalty famously.
Right.
So great season for SMU, and they spent a ton of money to get to this point. Their schedule is not as conducive this year, I would say. There are more tough teams than they had last year, although not in the non-conference, where they play East Texas A&M, which I don't know.
You text me, I'm like, I had never heard of that school.
I'm not sure where it's at. Baylor, which might be a bit of a challenge for them, and is also on the CW network. I just want to note that. And then they're at Missouri State, who's a brand new FBS team.
It's a curious road game.
It is. Yeah. And then the rest of their schedule is an odd one. So, they have a road game against their rival in TCU, and that could be a tricky game because that's a pretty good TCU team. They've got Stanford at home. They got to go to Clemson down the stretch. They got Miami, as we've already talked about, at home. They've got Louisville at home, and they got to close at a depleted but probably still dangerous Cal team. I think SMU is going to be good again. They kept their coaching staff largely intact. They've got good players, but they got pretty lucky last year, and they just have harder games on the schedule this year than they had last year. And I don't feel like they perhaps have the horses, no pun intended, to run completely through the schedule the way that it went last year for them.
Yeah, I mean, last year they were 11-1, 8-0 in the conference, right? And they happened to get the entire bottom of the field in the ACC. I'd be surprised if that happened to them this year, especially with a very tough non-conference game at TCU. Clemson is a top 5 team in the country. A lot of people have them maybe even top 3, top 2. Miami, go to Miami, or starting at home against Miami, and then Louisville later. So they're going to have 4 or 5 games where they're going to be more of a coin flip. And I pointed out earlier that Syracuse game could be really difficult.
Yeah. I only have them losing 1 game. 2 games. I have them losing at TCU, have them losing at Clemson. And I feel like they'll be in the mix for the playoff at that point, but I have a sneaking suspicion if one of their losses is at TCU, it might end up knocking them out of contention against a similarly pedigreed SEC team.
Yep. Yeah. I have them losing to Clemson and Miami and then beating TCU and Louisville. So at the end of the day, will a 10-2, will that be enough against maybe a 9-3 SEC team that maybe is going to play a tougher schedule? There's not going to be a lot of meat on the bone if they lose those games. They're going to have to try to win one of those games, most likely when it comes down the stretch.
I think I didn't mention my Miami pick, but I have them at 11-1. I had them losing at SMU. Right. And again, much like you felt about Notre Dame, I feel like Miami's going to lose a game somewhere down the line, as they did last year.
Yep.
Maybe it's at SMU. Maybe it's at Virginia Tech. Maybe they lose at home to Syracuse. It seems to happen regularly to that Miami team. Let's talk about Clemson. So, Clemson, a team that, again, made the playoff last year as the ACC champ. A lot of people think they may be the best team in the country this year. And they have an interesting schedule in a lot of ways in that it looks like they can handle everything on it. But there are a couple of games where it's like that could be a stumble for them. LSU,
right out of the gate.
Right out of the gate, Death Valley versus Death Valley, but it's their Death Valley that they're playing in. Troy, no. But at Georgia Tech, that's a tricky game. Syracuse, as you mentioned, could be a tricky game. At North Carolina, a month into the Belichick experiment. SMU at home. Duke at home could be a tricky game. At Louisville, and then they got to finish at South Carolina. I mean, I'll just a teaser. I have them going 12-0. I wouldn't be surprised if they ended up 10-2. It's again, are they good enough on both sides of the ball that they can just blow through that schedule the way that they would need to? Because the one thing I think that they've got a struggle with outside of the LSU game, they're going to be expected. I think they'll be expected to win that game, but it'll expected to be close. They'll be expected to win every other game on their schedule by a pretty good margin, I would say.
I think you're right. I think getting off on the right foot. Clemson made the playoff last year because of a 56-yard field goal or whatever it was against SMU. But this team's really good. They're bringing back their starting quarterback Klubnik, who was really good last year. They played really well against Texas in the first round of the playoff. I expect Clemson to be 11-1, losing at South Carolina. That's my only loss I have for them. I think they're going to be. I think they're going to beat LSU to start the season, and after that, like you said, I think they're going to roll through this schedule. As the landmines are there, I just think they're one of the best teams, and they're going to have a chance to really be really, really good this year. So I see Clemson as a playoff team almost regardless because they're going to have the LSU win. They're going to have the Georgia Tech win at Georgia Tech. They're going to have the SMU win and Louisville as well. And if somehow Florida State can stay above water maybe this year, maybe that helps them a little bit too.
Yeah.
But that South Carolina game, I'm not saying it's a throwaway game, but at that point, it may not. It's going to be a lot more to South Carolina than probably Clemson.
Right. Absolutely. Let's jump over to the two other teams that we thought of as potential playoff contenders in the ACC. Louisville ranked right now in the coaches poll, and they play a schedule that I feel like is not terribly conducive unless you've got really top level talent. Pretty easy going. I mean, Eastern Kentucky, James Madison, and Bowling Green as their non-conference. I guess they have a fourth non-conference, Kentucky. And then their schedule in the ACC. The games of note, I guess, they've got to go to Miami, they've got to go to Virginia Tech, they've got Clemson at home, and they're at SMU. It's a lot of potential stumbling blocks, and I think that they are slightly worse than three of those teams. So I think I've got them going 9-3 on the season. And look, I think my losses that I had them suffering at Miami, Clemson at home, and at SMU. Even if they beat SMU, I could see them losing at Virginia Tech. It just they are not quite of the quality from a roster level, I think, to finish much better than 3 losses on the season.
Yeah, I have the same 3 losses. I haven't seen enough. I mean, I know Louisville started 7-0 last year. They were really good off the bat, and then they kind of stumbled at the end. But this is a brutal schedule. After the bye week, they go at Miami, Boston College, at Vodtech, home against Cal, then at Clemson, at SMU, Clemson's at home. And then they play their rival. And that's a really tough finish to the schedule. 7 straight games to finish the season. So, I wouldn't even be surprised if Kentucky tripped them up at the end, playing right after the SMU game, after Clemson as well. So it's going to be difficult. If they happen to pick one of those off, then they're going to have to hold serve and finish 10-2 and to have an opportunity. But I don't know if they're going to have the opportunity to even play for the ACC championship based on that.
Let's go to the other team, Georgia Tech. Georgia Tech had an odd year last year, and they're probably going to have an odd year this year as well. So we've talked about this. They go to Colorado for the first game of the season. I don't know what to make of Colorado this year. I'm not expecting a lot out of them. But they have to play Clemson at home early in the season. They've got to go to Wake Forest. They've got to go to Duke. They've got Syracuse at home. They skip a lot of tough teams, but they've still got a lot of mid-level teams. And I guess it depends on how much quality you think they'll have in Atlanta on this team. And of course, at the end of this season, they got to play Georgia at Mercedes-Benz Stadium. Beating one of Clemson or Georgia in the same season feels like a big lift. maybe if you did that and you didn't lose another game,
Right.
you'd be totally fine. You'd be in the ACC title game. Losing both of them, the problem they have is there's really not a signature win elsewhere on the schedule.
Right. Those are the two games. So if they pick off either of those teams, then maybe you can have that discussion. But I have them 9-3, 6-2. I have them losing to Georgia and losing to Clemson, and I have losing to NC State too. It's just looking at Tech's last couple of years, they've always lose a game just like that.
Yeah, I had losing to Duke.
Yeah,
same thing.
Same idea. Like there's always going to be, we're projecting like what the things will look like, and there's certainly going to be upsets throughout the season. So Tech seems like they're on the right path. They had a really good year last year. They took Georgia to 8 overtimes last year. But it just seems like it's like you said, a heavy lift. And for them to really have a shot at the playoff and even the conference, they have to beat Clemson. That's their only opportunity.
So just to clarify, I believe if I did the tiebreakers right, my ACC title game would actually be Clemson SMU Part 2 because SMU would have the tiebreaker over Miami. But Miami would likely be in good enough shape that they would get into the playoff as an at-large. SMU would likely have to beat Clemson to get into the playoff at that point. So you could potentially, in that case, have 3 ACC teams in the mix if everything broke that particular way.
Yep, I had Clemson 8-0 and Miami 7-1, and then everyone 6-2. So I have Clemson, Miami, and you're right. I think that would keep both teams really in the at-large mix, right? Because as we said earlier, there's really probably only between Notre Dame and these two conferences 3 spots.
Yeah.
After we had our Big Ten and SEC discussions, we both feel pretty comfortable that there's going to be 4 from each, or a 5 and 3, or maybe even a 5th. It's going to be really difficult for these two conferences. Well, I know we'll talk about the Big 12 here shortly to get those extra bids.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting because there's only 12 teams and there's going to be 5 conference champions in there.
Mm-hmm.
And, if you've got so that you have essentially, what is that? 6 plus 5 is 11. If Notre Dame gets in, well, that's it.
Yep.
But this is where, again, and we talked about this a lot, the lack of quality depth in the ACC compared to the SEC or the Big Ten is going to afford ACC teams an opportunity to rack up a lot of wins. And in the eyes of the committee, this is the predicate of the argument that a lot of people are making, where it's like the total number of wins can't be the primary thing. It's got to be more than that. And it's not necessarily, well, who did you play in the non-conference? It's who did you play in the conference? This isn't college basketball. The quality of the teams you're playing in the conference does matter to some degree. If you run the table against those teams and beat them by a lot of points, great. But if you're scraping by, or if you've lost a couple of those games, that's a different story. Yep. And so it's going to be fascinating. And that's before we even get to the other conference that's in the mix. Because I can tell you all folks right now, I looked at Boise State. I don't see a route for them this year to do what they did last year, unless they do something crazy like win at Notre Dame.
Right.
So you're really talking about largely, I don't think anybody outside of that mix. And then that 12th team almost certainly just being a conference champion from one of the other conferences, from the group of 5. And that's that.
Yeah.
So let's go to the Big 12. And we're going to start off with the team that won it last year, and that's Arizona State. And Arizona State, the moment you start picking through their schedule, or at least the moment I did, you start to notice that, again, you're not dealing with a ton of ranked teams. And what you are dealing with is a ton of games against teams that are all kind of compressed between the 20th and the 50th best teams in the country, which will probably help with overall strength of schedule. But you're also dealing with a situation where you're going to have to win on the road. And I don't know if you're going to be able to necessarily do that. So Arizona State, they drew lucky because they get an SEC team on the road, but it's Mississippi State. They should be able to handle that. Their other 2 non-conference games are not a threat. But their road games are fascinating in the Big 12. They got to go to Baylor, they got to go to Utah, they got to go to Texas Tech, they got to go to Iowa State, and they got to go to Colorado. They still got to play Arizona at home. And then they've got, the very much wild cardy West Virginia team over. There's just a lot of those sorts of games where we're looking at it and we're saying to ourselves, if they want to play in the playoff, they're going to probably have to run the table or maybe lose 1 game at most. I had them losing 2, but that ends up kind of being the norm of what I find across most of the Big 12, where it looks like everybody might lose 2 games pretty straightforwardly.
Yeah, the Big 12, everyone says it's going to be the most fun conference, and it probably will be. It was that way last year, too. There was a lot of 7-2 teams, a lot of 6-3 teams. But to your point earlier about everyone's bunch, if Arizona State, who's number 11 in the ranked in the coaches poll, they're number 11, and they're probably there because they're of their season last year, so they're getting that buy-in from last year. But then you have this huge group at the bottom: Kansas State at 20, Iowa State at 21, BYU at 23, Texas Tech at 24. So you have them at the bottom of that top 20, that top 25 there. So yeah, same for me for Arizona State. I have them 10-2, 7-2 overall. I have them losing at Utah and losing at Iowa State. I think those are tough games. Iowa State's has always played really tough at home. It's after a sequence of playing 3 straight games. In the middle schedule, playing 3 really tough games in a row with Utah, Texas. Maybe not Houston as much, but certainly a tough part of their schedule.
Yeah, Houston's pretty bad.
But Utah and Texas Tech are going to be formidable opponents. So you're right. I have them 10-2, 7-2 overall in the mix. But again, it's really going to be interesting to see how that conference shapes up. Are they going to get enough of a non-con push? Mississippi State's not going to do much for them, unfortunately, unless they somehow surprise us all and win some games. But really, this is where the Big 12, as you said, maybe has a little trouble of gaining any at-large spots. It's really going to be an issue for them.
It's like 2 teams would have to separate themselves, it feels like. And I'm having a hard time seeing that. Let's talk about the 2 teams that feel like, along with Arizona State, might have the best chance of separating themselves. Let's go to Iowa State next. Iowa State was in the mix for the playoff right up until the very tail end of things last year, loses in the Big 12 title game. And this year, they don't really play a lot of challenging teams early. They do have Iowa at home, and they've got to play that game against Kansas State in Dublin. I actually have them beating Iowa, because they've kind of, I don't know if they've actually had the upper hand, but it's felt like they've had the upper hand in that series for a while. And I bet if I went back and looked, I'd be like, oh, they've actually traded off wins every year. But it just feels like every time I look at that, Iowa State somehow pulls out a victory. Then you start diving into their conference play, and they kind of get lucky with their road games. At Cincinnati doesn't seem that daunting. At Colorado doesn't seem that bad. At TCU doesn't seem that bad. It's their home games that are the problem. They got BYU at home. They've got Arizona State at home, and they've got to play Kansas at home. And they also have to go to Oklahoma State. One thing I did learn in the mix earlier, like there's a conference game that isn't a conference game in this season. Is it Kansas State playing Arizona? It doesn't count as a conference game because it was scheduled between the 2 teams before Arizona joined the Big 12. Henceforth, it's a regular season game that won't count in the conference standings. That's not apropos, obviously, to Iowa State, but yeah.
It's Kansas State, TCU.
TCU, not Arizona. But anyway, diving into this, I think if Iowa State obviously can pull off the wins at home against BYU and Arizona State and wins at home against Iowa, they're in really good shape. But I do question their ability to do all of that simply because, like, again, I don't see the top-level quality on their roster to be able to say, oh, yeah, certainly they're going to be able to handle that. They're a team that's been very good historically, but they've also been a team that, like you'll see sometimes with a Minnesota or an Iowa, they'll be bad enough at the wrong time that they'll lose a couple of games that they shouldn't.
Yeah, it's an interesting schedule, and they go to Arkansas State, which is another interesting road game in this.
Butch Jones
that we've seen today. Yeah, I don't. So some interesting group of 5 road games you've seen. But anyway, I have them losing that game in Dublin, and then I have them losing to TCU. And I went back and forth. I had them between 8-4 and 10-2. I landed on 10-2 just because I think they return a lot of guys this year. They're going to be actually really. That's important, I think, in today's college football, especially in this conference. But they have a really tough, like you said, tough home schedule that I think is going to make it challenging to go 10-2. But again, they're in the same boat. They have to go 10-2. They have to get the Big 12 championship to have any opportunity to actually go to the playoffs. Just like last year, you have to win this conference.
Yeah, I had them as one of the teams in the Big 12 title game. I think I had them 8-1 in conference. So I think for me, it's them and Arizona State again, which feels boring. But it also is where I say to myself, that's probably not going to happen. It'll probably be somebody else. But who else could it be? When I look at the rest of them, I mean, I'll just say BYU was probably the choice, and then they lose their quarterback, they didn't lose their quarterback. The quarterback had to leave.
Yeah.
I look at them, and I see a team that's probably a 4-loss team on the season at best. Kansas State, another example of a team that could be good, but I doubt they're going to be much better than good. They, again, seem like a team that's going to lose 4 games in the conference schedule. TCU, who's kind of on the periphery as well. I think they could play spoiler for a few teams, but I also see them in that mix. So really, from my perspective, it leaves Texas Tech and maybe Utah as the two teams that you would look at and say, well, maybe they could make a run for it. Let's start with Texas Tech, because I think that they're the more intriguing of the two teams in a lot of ways, and certainly the one where there's been the most press around them because of how aggressively they've been playing the portal and trying to put themselves in a position to be a player in college football moving forward. And, they look like, again, they have a relatively favorable non-conference schedule. Their one power conference game is against Oregon State. They got to go to Utah. They got to go to Arizona State. They got to go to Kansas State. They have BYU at home, and they got to go to West Virginia. I mean, they might be able to run the table, but again, it just feels like that's a team that's going to have a lot of landmines that they got to maneuver through, even to get to like the 2-loss mark. Mm-hmm. I worry about their ability beyond that.
Yeah, I'm with you. I think they're still maybe a year away as they are starting to really pick up their recruiting. They've signed, like we said in the previous podcast, starting to sign 5-star guys, and they want to be a player long term. However, their schedule sets up sort of nicely early on. Obviously, they have their 3 cupcakes. I guess Oregon State's now considered a cupcake, and they play at Utah. But then they have a really tough stretch after that Houston game, and they have Kansas at home. They go at Arizona State. They then play Oklahoma State, which I think they'll be a lot better this year. I can't see Gundy's team going 0-9 again in the conference. Then they go at Kansas State and then BYU. So they have a really tough stretch. I had them going 9-3, 6-3 overall in the conference, losing home in Kansas, at Arizona State, at Kansas State. I just think I think they'll be very good. I think they'll be good enough to get to the championship game of the conference.
Yeah. When you look at Utah, I feel like Utah's got some opportunities. That game at UCLA is going to be really fascinating, and I think a really good barometer early of not just their relative strength, but what is UCLA going to look like this year?
Right.
And then you run through the rest of the schedule. At Wyoming can be a sneaky, difficult game if you're not careful. But they get Texas Tech at home. They get Arizona State at home. They got, the rivalry game against BYU. They get Kansas State at home. Like, their road games seem manageable, and their home games are against the good teams. But that can backfire. And I think we've seen it backfire in the Big 12 quite a bit, where it's like teams will lose those home games, and then they'll also lose the road games. And that's where you end up 8-4 or 9-3.
Yeah. And it's nice we have a Pac-12 after dark game to start the season, UCLA and Utah to start it off, right? At the 11 p.m. Fox slot.
Man, that's going to be – I might have to DVR that one. I'm just worried about – I'm going to have to take a nap beforehand. That's a late kick.
Yeah, that's fitting in that opening week schedule is probably really difficult. But, yeah, I mean, I had him UCLA losing this game when we talked about the Big Ten earlier. So I am 3-0 the non-con, and then I have him losing at Texas Tech or home against Texas Tech, Arizona State, and BYU. So I have them losing still 3 games, but I haven't been Kansas State. So I think they'll be a good team. Again, this conference is all over the place, so it's really difficult to kind of see what it's going to look like. But again, another team at 9-3 for me.
Yeah, it's just going to be interesting as we go through all of this to try to parse out who are the actual contenders in the Big 12. Because whether you look at the rankings as they're currently constituted, or whether you look at S&P Plus, what you run into over and over again is like a lot of teams that are clustered towards the bottom of the top 25. And you end up with a circumstance where trying to guess at who the best teams are is very difficult. Because, I mean, BYU, according to S&P Plus, is going to be really good, but they're missing a pretty key piece now. So then what next? Like, your next best S&P Plus team
State
is Kansas State at 18, but then you got Iowa State at 28, Arizona State at 35, TCU at 25. I mean, they're just kind of mixed all the way through. And it's interesting, again, the schedules and the way they break out. And the reason why we're trying to do it the way that we're doing it is it's not just about what the preseason rankings are. It's also about how those teams mesh with each other. So if I had to guess at this point, I still think that between returning production and just the overall vibe I get off of it, Arizona State feels like a team that's going to be in the mix. And you got to give Iowa State the benefit of the doubt, I think, at this point, until they demonstrate that that isn't something that we should give them. But it is wide open, and I wouldn't be shocked if you had a 10-2 team and a 9-3 team playing in the Big 12 title game.
I think that's what makes this conference fun is in this new era of what we're in college football, this conference there's no dominant power, right? The other three, there certainly is. This one does not have one historically point to that team. It's going to be the team to beat every year. So, Arizona State 16 preseason last year wins the conference, right? And now we have this maybe group of teams that they all want to be that team, that standard bearer. So it makes it for, I think, a really fun start to this new Big 12. I actually had Kansas State in the championship.
Oh.
I had Arizona State, just tiebreaker wise. That's how it worked out.
Yeah.
But I think based on what we're seeing with returning production, Kansas State's offensive returners is 71%, 63% on defense. So they have a lot of returners as well. So that's where I really like Kansas State a lot to make a run. And they've always been in the mix. And again, like you said, no one had Arizona State last year, but certainly could see a totally different championship game here. But we could see very similar outcome we saw this year. But with all the tiebreakers that exist and a 16-team conference, I mean, last year there was, I think, 4 7-2 teams that were in the mix. And going into that last Saturday, a bunch of different things had to happen. So, I mean, while the big conference, certainly there's issues with it, it is nice to see a conference like this that really it's any given Saturday mostly.
Well, I think, and look, I'll reserve the right, if Kansas State goes and blows out Iowa State in Dublin, I would probably flop my prediction between them, and I just have a sneaking suspicion Iowa State's going to win that game. I have nothing to go off of. I mean, we have Kansas State fans in the audience probably mad at me. If I'm wrong, I'll say so. But, the big thing for them, and the big thing I think you see elsewhere, is just, again, like, what are the road games and what are you going to be running into? And with, I don't think neither of us have mentioned Baylor, but, Baylor, according to the S&P Plus rankings coming out of the fall, they're 35th in the country. That's a team that could be dangerous. And I think as a dangerous offense, has a lot of production coming back. I mean, there's things about them to even like. This is where it's like, we'll let Arizona State's great season last year color our interpretation of Arizona State, but we will, then you let teams' bad seasons or average seasons color your impression of them. That's where I look at a team like that and I say to myself, well, maybe I'm being unfair. And then you look at what the matchups are. So again, it's a team. I think there's a lot of good teams in the Big 12. There's really not a great team. And what we see oftentimes, kind of like what we saw in the Big 10 last year, is that will drag everybody down as you're talking about playoff arguments.
Yeah, you're right. And with all that being said, with the Big 12, is you have this hodgepodge of a group that's all trying to rise. Like Arizona State's now getting the benefit of the doubt, but maybe it's a 1-year thing, right? Maybe they just hit lightning in a bottle, because no one was even looking at them when they were 7-2. They won their last 4 games to get to the playoff, and all of a sudden they were 1 play away from playing in the semifinal. So this is a conference where it actually may be a team that gets hot late and makes that run, where that's not going to be doable in the other conferences, just because there's more 5 stars all around the field, top 20 talent, top 15 recruiting classes. That just doesn't exist in this conference.
Right. I mean, it's really going to be fascinating to watch. There's going to be a lot of fun. Like you said, it just might not result in a lot of playoff eligible or playoff caliber teams in the eyes of the committee. So, so anyway, what we'll do on the next episode of Football Weather is we will, I think, give our playoff predictions individually and see where we land on all of that. And then obviously some other stuff going on in college football. It's been somewhat quiet on the legalistic front here lately, I think, because people are finally focusing on the games, but there's plenty that's going to be talked about and needs to be talked about as we move forward. So any final thoughts before we wrap up?
No, excited. Like I said, we said earlier, we were less than 2 weeks away from the first games of the season. So, you're right. There's not a lot going on. I think I talked about before the pod. The only thing that we've really seen is talking about the calendar. Yeah. And that's important for folks that really need to figure this out going forward. That's really been the only conversation lately.
A lot of fun times coming up with college football very shortly, and we'll be here to cover it throughout the course of the season. If you haven't yet, please follow us on Spotify or subscribe on Apple if you haven't yet already. And if you've got comments or questions, you can tweet them at us at footballweather4. It's spell out weather, but remove the R and put a 4 in at the end. We'd love to hear from you. Or you can comment on Spotify. You can comment on YouTube. We'll try to get to those questions as we move forward. Anyway, for Matt Blask, I'm Galen Clavey. This is Football Weather. Catch you folks on the flip side. So long, everybody. Bye.